One of the reasons that job creation is going to be wanting in this country, and in fact more jobs are going to be destroyed, has to do with what's going on in Congress. Now, I read yesterday, I didn't even realize this was happening until I read the story, but starting May 24th, there is a new rule. The government changed the meaning of a disability for the Americans with Disability Act. And, while they changed the meaning of what it means to be disabled, they should have actually changed the name of the act, too. Maybe they should have called it the Unemployment Creation Act. Or maybe better yet, you'd have to be a complete idiot to hire an American Act. Listen to what is now going to be considered to be a disability and entitled to special protection under the law. Disabilities will include such things as diabetes, cancer, epilepsy, bipolar disorder, which is manic depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, autism, asthma, arthritis, obsessive compulsive disorder, HIV infection. That's just a few. I've read some articles that say that as many as 50% of the workforce may now be able to claim that they suffer a disability and now enjoy some kind of protections at their job. Now, a lot of these accommodations include extended periods of time off, where employers have to let you leave for extended periods of time, but take you back whenever you feel like coming back. But I think one of the biggest problems with this new act is the burden of proof. Up until now, if you had a disability and you demanded a certain expensive accommodation from your employer and your employer refused to provide it, you could bring that employer to court and sue them. But the burden of proof was on the employee to prove that A, he had a disability, and B, that the particular accommodation was actually necessary. So the employee had to prove that. Now they're turning it around. Now the employee doesn't have to prove anything. The burden of proof is on the employer to prove that the employee doesn't need the accommodation. Well, how do you prove a negative? And in fact, now people don't even actually have to have the disability. They can just allege that they have it. They don't have to prove it. It's up to the employer to prove that they don't have it. Well, again, how do you prove a negative? So in other words, this bill basically now allows every employee to hold the knife to the throat of his employer and demand various accommodations, because if they go to court, the employee is going to win. So this is dramatically increasing the cost of creating jobs. It's diminishing the benefits to employers of creating jobs. It's increasing the legal liability of being an employer. So what does it mean? Well, it means that fewer companies are going to hire. Many people won't hire anybody. Now, the good news about this act is it only applies to companies that have 15 or more employees. So if you have 14 employees, what does this rule do? This rule says I will never hire another person. I will do whatever I can. I'll get a temp. I'll outsource. I'll hire somebody in India, whatever I can. But there's no way. The cost of hiring that 15th employee is so great that you'd have to be an idiot to do it. Now, what if you have 15 employees? Well, the decision is clear. Pick your least productive employee and fire them. I mean, it certainly makes a lot of sense. That's what I'd do. Now, what if you have 20, 25, 30 employees? Obviously, you can't maybe lay off 40% of your workforce right away, so you're kind of stuck. Now, one thing you can do is don't hire anybody else, because the more people that you hire, the more likely it is that you hire somebody that's going to come back and, with some kind of outrageous demand. But what you can immediately start to do is look for ways to outsource, look for ways to hire people in other countries where you don't have this problem. Because, see, the government is thinking about, let's create a special class of individual that can demand special treatment from anybody who hires them. Well, when they do that, then they're putting a huge liability on the employer. It's a burden on the employer. And what if they don't want to bear it? What if they don't want to suffer it? I mean, I read a quote in the story where the government is hoping that, well, this is going to lead to more accommodation. Anyway, I'm running out of time. I will be back to discuss this after the break, so don't go away. This is Peter Schiff on SchiffRadio.com. Looking at this article on workman's comp, I'm looking at a quote from, I guess, one of the government people. Do I still have that Hopefully I didn't erase that article. I had it up on my computer screen. Unfortunately I got rid of it. But it was an interesting quote because the government worker had said something like, I hope now that instead of challenging employees who claim they have disabilities and arguing over whether or not they have a disability, that employers will just accept the fact that they have to make their offices and their businesses hospitable for all sorts of people with all sorts of disabilities. So in other words, that employers are just going to act like charities and they're just going to spend whatever kind of money they need based on the whim of any of their employees who may or might not actually have one of these diseases that now fits as a disability. I'm not really sure how far it goes. I mean, does back pain? I mean, I have lower back problem. Is that a disability when sometimes I get up and my back is bothering me? I mean, I don't know. I mean, how much is going to the definition is now so broad and so loose that just about anybody can claim they're disabled. And even if you want to pick, you can obviously pick one of the ailments that qualifies because you don't even have to prove that you suffer from it. All you have to do is say that you suffer from it, and it's up to your employer to prove that you don't, which, as I said, is very difficult because how do you prove a negative? My brother Andrew just emailed me something on the Americans with Disability Act stuff, and I'm going to read it really quickly. And, if you were thinking about hiring somebody, think again. In fact, after I finish reading this, hiring somebody might be the furthest thing from your mind. In fact, if you're an employer, what you might be thinking about is, who can I get rid of? Anyway, here, let me read this. The principles provided that an impairment need not prevent or significantly restrict performance of a major life activity to be considered a disability. Additionally, whether an impairment is a disability should be construed broadly to the maximum extent allowed under the law. The principles also provide that, with one exception, ordinary eyeglasses or contact lenses, mitigating measures such as medication and assistive devices like hearing aids must not be considered when determining whether someone has a disability. So in other words, if somebody is able to correct their disability with a hearing aid, or maybe somebody is missing a limb but he has a prosthesis, if they can correct it, they're still disabled, even though they don't really have the disability because of it's been corrected. Listen to this. Furthermore, impairments that are episodic, such as epilepsy, or in remission, such as cancer, are disabilities if they would be, and they should be substantially limiting when they're active. So in other words, if somebody had cancer but is in remission and has no cancer symptoms, they still have a disability because the cancer could come back, even though right now it's in remission. I mean, basically, if you read what they're saying, they're pretty much creating a protective minority class that includes everybody. Everybody in America is disabled. So basically what this means is that hiring anybody in America is about to get a lot more expensive and a lot riskier, which means far fewer jobs are going to be created. And in fact, many jobs that currently exist will be eliminated as a result of this act. Next up is Frank from Virginia.